This, I think it should be a bad look. I'm disgusted. My heart goes out to my brother Steve Wilks because he keeps getting screwed over time and time again. Arizona, Carolina, here he is in San Francisco. You're there for your first year, 1 year. You have the top 3 ranked defense. You've got a team that spent 57 plus minutes holding the Kansas City Chiefs to under 20 points. And you still can't win a game, but Steve Wilks is out of a job, but you keep yours. How about firing yourself?
And once again, this is the problem. The national media, pundits that do not watch the 49ers, do not closely follow the 49ers, or any team for that matter, but then yet have to give their take about certain changes that an organization made is why it drives me fucking nuts.
How about firing yourself?
Had to jump on here and give my thoughts and opinions about Kyle Shanahan relieving Steve Wilks, defensive coordinator, of his duties. And with that being said, let's get into it, y'all. Yo, what's going on, everybody? It's your boy, Ryan Tigey, back in action. I had to jump on here. Going to make this one relatively short, but the Stephen A. Smith take on Kyle Shanahan and his aggressive opinion about essentially Kyle using Steve Wilks as a scapegoat. That is not what's happening right now. For those like myself, and I'm sure many of you out there who actually follow the San Francisco 49ers, regardless of their relevancy to the national masses, this is something that I'm pretty sure we all saw coming. Yes. Did the defense hold up their end of the bargain in the Super Bowl? Absolutely. Did Kyle make this decision based off one game? No. Again, a lot of us know this already, but Kyle needed to make a change, and it was pretty obvious for those who follow the team closely. The first point is he has no time to waste. Because the San Francisco 49ers went to the Super Bowl yet again, a lot of these defensive coordinators or potential candidates for the defensive coordinator, they're already hired. So Kyle Shanahan had to make this decision and make it quickly. There's already been teams that weren't in the playoffs or let alone got to the Super Bowl that have potentially weeks of more time than the 49ers to get all their staff situated. So that's point number one. There wasn't much time to waste. Kyle thought this is the right decision. Clearly, John was probably on board with it as well, too. And so there's no point in wasting, especially when you're already behind the 8 ball as it relates to hiring potential candidates. I believe there's some good internal candidates that could potentially take the DC job for the San Francisco 49ers, but any outside candidates, you got no time to waste, and Kyle made the decision. The second thing is the 49ers defense and Steve Wilks as defensive coordinator, they weren't vibing all year long. Everybody points to Kyle calling that timeout in overtime in the Super Bowl. That is because Kyle didn't feel comfortable with Steve Wilks trying to run a zero blitz. So he called timeout, something very uncharacteristic of Kyle. If you look back at Robert Saleh's tenure, at D'Amico Ryan's tenure, Kyle Shanahan, for the most part, let those guys handle the defense with minimal interference, let alone during an actual game does he interfere or disrupt a play call that they're trying to do. So it was out of characteristic of Kyle, which again leads to he was uncomfortable with Wilks. And why is that? Well, it's because there's proof in that exact aspect. What happened to San Francisco 49ers when they played the Minnesota Vikings? Steve Wilks ran a zero blitz and the Niners got roasted. It was like a 50 or 60 yard touchdown run to the house because Steve Wilks wanted to run a zero blitz at the very end of halftime. And so naturally, when you try to be aggressive when you don't need to be, and you get burned by that, any head coach is going to make sure we don't fall into that mistake again. And he was even more prevalent when Kyle Shanahan, again, uncharacteristically, talked about that zero blitz at the end of halftime to the media, which was essentially calling out Steve Wilks for running a moronic play call in Minnesota right up before halftime. Wasn't necessary. And then Steve Wilks ultimately came out and apologized which again, that was all weird.
Called an all-out blitz, and he's got to get rid of it right away, and he threw it up and got a chance for a pick, didn't come through with it, and they got a touchdown. It's a real bad play by us.
Are you okay with that blitz call in that moment?
That's stuff we'll discuss throughout this week. Obviously, I did not like the result.
But again, that's an issue. We got burned during it once. He tried doing it again in the Super Bowl. So that adds to the reasoning as to why Kyle made the decision to move on. Also, another thing that many people didn't talk about this year, but when the 49ers went up against the Seattle Seahawks, John Lynch got involved. Well, Steve Wilks, as we all know, has a secondary or DB background. That's what he's worked the vast majority of his football tenure as he's come up. So he thrives off coaching the secondary and specifically the DBs on the outside. Well, when the Niners went to go play the Seattle Seahawks, Steve Wilks was having a hard time trying to figure out how to cover DK Metcalf and still work within the scheme that the 49ers have been running the past couple of years, the 4-3. And the GM, thankfully, gold jacket, safety, Hall of Famer, John Lynch is the man. But you don't hear too many stories like this where John Lynch, the general manager of the 49ers, had to come in to defensive meetings and help scheme up how the 49ers are going to handle DK Metcalf, specifically in the pass game. So again, that is just more evidence that it's a little bit uncomfortable letting Steve Wilks have complete anonymity. And then it comes down to the 49ers defensive players, the stars and the studs they have all over the defensive side of the football. They made multiple comments throughout the season that indicated they didn't necessarily like what Steve Wilks is doing. We're still getting adjusted to one another, et cetera, et cetera. Well, one of those people, I don't know, is the best defensive player in the NFL in Nick Bosa. Nick Bosa specifically indicated in a post-game interview talking about how the 49ers always rush with 4D linemen. Well, Steve Wilks was trying to squeeze in a fifth.
It definitely works out. Sometimes I'm not used to it. We're usually a rush 4 kind of team, and it's a little different this year. But yeah, I don't know.
Steve Wilks got here. He said he was kind of in a unique spot where he was learning the defense here and trying to kind of implement his stuff with it rather than, putting in his own system.
Yeah, I think he was trying to figure it out a little bit with what kind of defense we were going to be, and at the end of the day, we do what we do, and we've done it since I've been here. Zone coverage and rushing 4, and there's tons of different levels to doing it, and we need to be at the highest level possible of doing that. And if we are, then we're going to be really good defense.
He said that he feels more relaxed now that he's on the field and having more fun. Have you noticed that? How has that shown up?
Yeah, I mean, it was stressful in the beginning of the year.
And so when you have your best player who you just paid over $100 million to, a guy who gets nothing but praise about his work ethic, how smart he is at knowing football, you value your all pros, your studs, you value their opinion. And when Nick Bosa came out and said that, it gave a little peek behind the curtain that maybe players aren't necessarily happy with what Steve Wilks is trying to do on the defensive side of the ball. And then there was, of course, rumors about Fred Warner not necessarily agreeing with all the play calls that were being called from Steve Wilks. And this specifically was happening when Steve Wilks was up in the box calling plays. And if we remember, and this leads me to my next point, Kyle made Steve Wilks come down to the sideline and call plays. Kyle just didn't randomly think of that out of thin air and just say, oh, hey, I want to change it up. Kyle doesn't give a shit if a defensive coordinator is in the box or on the sideline. But you know who did care? His players. Specifically, I don't know, again, the best linebacker in the NFL in Fred Warner. That is what they've been doing, and again, have been successful with the past 3 or 4 years prior to Wilks coming on as defensive coordinator. Their defensive coordinators, Robert Saleh, D'Amico Ryans, they were on the sideline. They could immediately run off the field, talk face-to-face, and give immediate feedback versus having to run, call the phone, and then get a hold of Steve Wilks up in the booth and then relay it back down. And then you're only having communication with one person versus you can have communication with, 4, 5, 6 of your defensive players. See what the vibe is on the sideline, see what they're seeing, and get immediate feedback to make immediate adjustments. And again, Fred Warner, known as a extremely instinctual and smart player, the most versatile linebacker, can cover, can come up and stop the run. Again, another guy you listen to an opinion to. So that's just two of the best players on the San Francisco 49er team, let alone the two best defensive players on the defense. They're giving us little clues throughout the entire year about not feeling 100% comfortable with what Steve Wilks is doing and what he's trying to do with his play calls. So that adds a little bit to the reasoning as to why Kyle Shanahan relieved Steve Wilks of his duties. And I think the final straw that broke the camel's back, I believe that's how they say it, was players after the Super Bowl came out and said they weren't ready for some of the play calls that Kansas City had ran during the game, specifically the designed runs for Patrick Mahomes. That's not something they prepped for. And a lot of them, it sounded like, didn't necessarily know what to do, or were even more of a red flag, not even prepared for that type of scenario. So when you combine all those things, and that's just what we know out in the public, let alone what really was going on behind the scenes, there was extreme, I believe, disconnect into regards of what the 49ers structurally have done to be successful in the defense years prior to then what a new voice coming in from the outside was trying to implement. And there was definitely some adjustment time period that needed to be made. But no, he was not fired unjustly with any bias. It just wasn't a good fit. And that's what drives me fucking insane about these national media pundits who have loud voices and get out to the masses and spread that kind of bullshit around about Steve Wilks is being fucked over. He wasn't fucked over. He came in to the best open position coordinator-wise in the NFL. You have all pros and pro bowlers handed to you on a silver platter, and it just wasn't a good fit. And that's okay. And that's fine. And I'm not saying it was easy for Wilks. He didn't bring in any of his own staff. It was just him that moved over. Normally they bring over, obviously, assistants, quality control people, whatever it is. He wasn't able to bring any staff. And then, of course, he had to learn our defense. And again, not being easy, especially when the defense the prior year was ranked #1 in the entire NFL. And to his credit, the DBs, Charvarius Ward, Diamondo Lenore, they got better this year. There's no question about that. Mooney Ward made it to his first All-Pro season, and Diamondo Lenore, anybody with two eyes can see that dude's a fucking absolute dog. So they did improve. But it sounds like the overarching disconnect and what Kyle Shanahan is going to be looking for in a new defensive coordinator, whoever that is that he hires, the biggest disconnect was the linebacker play. I truly believe Fred Warner behind closed doors, even though we only got, potentially little hints, little clues that he didn't like what was going on. And the fact that Steve Wilks moved down, Fred Warner was always very political about it, handle it, like a professional, like he is. But there was a disconnect between the front end and the back end all season long on the defensive side of the ball. And that has to do directly with the linebackers because they're in the middle. They see everything that's going on in front of them, and they have to be in constant communication with the guys behind him. So I believe Kyle Shanahan, he will look for somebody with a linebacker background. If I had to guess, potential internal candidate, that'd be good. Johnny Holland. I know he's been battling with some health issues, but he'd be somebody I think would be an awesome, easy fit for him to do. And there's a whole bunch of other candidates internally and specifically out externally that could be a good fit for this position. But I think it's going to be someone based around the linebackers, just like Robert Saleh was, just like D'Amico Ryans was. So I think that's what Kyle's going to be looking for. But again, Steve Wilks did not get fucked over. It just simply didn't work. So I just had to give my 2 cents out there. I'll be back with an episode soon regarding what the priorities are for the San Francisco 49ers ahead of the draft. And obviously we're already in not the official offseason, but we're technically in the offseason. I believe the official new season starts in March, but I'll be back with some updates about what the 49ers need to do in the draft. And of course, priorities with guys that they already got on their roster. So until then, like, comment, subscribe, hit me up. Bye.
Pick it up, pick it up, pick it up, pick it up. You see the drippy, I'm fitted up. Hop in my car and the giddy up. Secure the bag, yeah, I get the bus. Pick it up, pick it up, pick it up. You see the drip, yeah, I'm fitted up. Hop in my car and get it up. Secure the bag, yeah, I get the buff. Pick it up, pick it up, pick it up, pick it up. Ooh, I've been on the flex since flex zone. Neighborhood all in your ear.